hung benzaguru pema cd hung onga hung benzaguru pema cd hung onga hung benzaguru pema cd hung. Hello everyone and welcome to my Tuesday Dharma talk here at the Chitta Bhavana Ashram. Today's talk is entitled The Path of the Buddha, and we'll take approximately 40 minutes, after which we'll have a question and answer period if anyone has any questions. And please feel free, as always, to interrupt me during the course of the talk should you have any questions. I think it's always better to ask your questions when they occur to you so that the matter that you're asking about is uppermost in everyone's mind, including my own mind. So, today's talk is entitled The Path of the Buddha. In his paper, Arhants, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas, Bhikkhu Bodhi discusses the paths of the Arhat and the Bodhisattva in relation to the Buddha and the idea of Buddhahood. Bodhi is perhaps the greatest living Pali English translator, or at least, if not the greatest, certainly one of the better known. One-time Theravadin translator scholar, he is now residing in a Chinese Mahayana monastery, and has even been seen at teachings given by the Dalai Lama of Tibet, which is somewhat unusual for a Theravada teacher, if he still considers himself to be Theravada. In this talk, I intend to explore these paths in the context of the Pali Canon. For, contrary to popular misconception, it is not true that the path of the Bodhisattva does not appear in the Pali texts, or that the path of the Arhat is not relevant to the path of the Bodhisattva. If one examines the canon as a whole, one will see that these two paths are intricately interconnected, as one might expect in a dependently arising world. Once again, we discover through close analysis that Hinayana and Mahayana are not mutually exclusive, but that the essential axioms that underlie both are implicit in the original Pali sources. The Pali word Arhat is derived from the Sanskrit arhat, able, which means able. The word is used all through the Pali Canon to describe one who has achieved the goal of the path taught by Gautama, the Buddha. This goal posits the attainment of nirvana and the state of the deathless, both in relation to the established karmic potentialities, or sanskaras, and in relation to the arising of future potentialities through the extinction of desirous attachment. Like the Buddha, the Tathagata, he who has stood erect and gone this way, the Arhat is not reborn. The moment the karmic potentiality is cut off in him, he is liberated. This is an essential change of state from which there is no returning. The Arhat is perfected and wise. He exists in a state of perfect clarity of mind. He has no intentionality or bias, or, to put it a different way, his intentionality is perfectly spontaneous, without attachment like that of the Tibetan Mahasiddha. He is utterly freed from all conditioning, all illusions, and all delusions. When the Buddha woke in northeast India about around 447 before the Common Era, he despaired of being able to teach the Dharma, the truth, to men, weighted down as they are by the dirt of attachment. A deva, Brahma Sahampati, inspired him to teach in order to save those who could be saved, the few whose coating of dust was least. The Buddha knew that his realization was unique in this age, and yet rediscovered repeatedly in all ages as the ultimate realization of the nature of reality and emancipation itself. Therefore, his life represents the advent of a new Buddha eon, characterized by the spread of Dharma civilization surrounded by the darkness of self-perpetuating suffering. The Buddha Dharma is an ontological bubble. Men pestered him with religious questions about the nature of the gods and the world, etc. But the Buddha declined to speculate and taught the direct method of emancipation, the method of detachment from desire that leads to arhatship. He knew that this liberates the power of truth, that in turn leads to wisdom, but he intimated all the time that his teaching was a mere fraction of the totality of his wisdom and spiritual knowledge. In fact, The Dharma is so vast it can barely be discerned in the age of men who live barely 100 or 120 years, compared to the lifespan and intelligence of the Devas. So great was the charisma of the Buddha that many men and women too, those who were karmically able, became arhants either immediately or shortly after hearing the Buddha speak, followed by a brief period of meditation not shorter than 5 or 7 days. The Buddha taught that 3 things are necessary to become an arhat: understanding, discipline, and meditation, and that these things are also the way. He also taught many individualized methods adapted to the peculiar needs of each person based on their karmic context at any given time. Understanding is, however, the essential first step, and he who perfects his understanding through the juxtaposition of faith and questioning or investigation becomes a stream winner, or more literally stream entrant, who will attain perfect emancipation within 7 rebirths at most, depending on his or her karma. Karmic potentialities can also be destroyed by meditation, so that the advent of emancipation can be accelerated through practice. The Buddha was an arhat, but an arhat is not a Buddha. The essential difference between an arhat and a Buddha is that an arhat follows the path taught by a Buddha, but a Buddha is the rediscoverer or discoverer of that path. The powers of an arhat pertain to impermanence, craving, suffering, seclusion, renunciation, mindfulness, striving, and spiritual power, whereas those of a Buddha are far more numinous and abstract: possibilities and impossibilities, results of actions, that is karma, ways leading everywhere, the elements of the world, inclinations and dispositions of beings, emancipation and attainment, recalling past lives, the divine eye or karmic destinations, and the destruction of the taints, which is equivalent to emancipation. The powers of a Buddha are more cosmic, if you like, ontically and karmically inclined, whereas those of an arhat are more psychological, ethical, and ascetic. The epithet knower of the world is one of a group of 9 epithets used with reference to both arhats and the Buddha that is unique to the Buddha. One might say that the arhat is the master of dispassion, whereas the Buddha is the master of wisdom and power. In particular, the Buddha did not learn it from anybody else. Thus he is self-ordained, although it is clear from the story of Sumedha, which I'll be discussing, that a bodhisattva can arise in the time of a Buddha and even be recognized by him. After the Enlightenment, en route to Benares, near the Gaya River, before the Buddha had revealed himself to men, the ascetic Upaka came upon Gautama in the road. Upaka was an ascetic of the Ajivika sect, a popular spiritual philosophy of the time. The Ajivikas believed that the soul must pass through a predetermined series of states before it can achieve final liberation. Nothing can be done to change this necessity. In particular, established karmic potentials cannot be destroyed except by fruition. Thus, they were considered fatalists who denied the law of karma itself. However, they also believed that asceticism can ameliorate future unarisen effects. Upaka noticed the face of the Buddha, which was bright, clear, and serene. The Pali texts identify this as a byproduct of meditation, and he asks the Buddha who his teacher is. The Buddha replies that he is self-ordained. This was, therefore, the first speech of the Buddha after his enlightenment. Upaka, however, was doubtful. Scratching his head, he muttered perhaps, and continued on his way, clearly unimpressed. Buddha is also referred to in the Pali texts as a bodhisattva. The Sanskrit word is bodhisattva, he who has the essence or bodhi of wisdom, or sattva, prior to becoming a Buddha. The Buddha Dipankara, who lived thousands of ages ago, when he encounters Sumedha, predicted Gautama's future Buddhahood. According to the Chronicle of Buddhas, the Buddha Vamsa, Sumedha was a wealthy Brahmin 100,004 ages ago, an age, that is a kappa or a kalpa, being a huge but definite period of time. I have in the text about 16 billion years, but actually I was just working this out, and it's 16, depending on what you mean by a kappa, it varies between 16,788,000 and 1,343,840,000 years. That's the difference. The first number is a small kalpa, and the last number is a great kalpa. And I'm not sure which kind of kalpa is being referred to. I think probably it's a large kalpa, which would be 1,343,840,000 years. Sumedha lived in the city of Amavati and was a rich agriculturalist. He was also a Brahmin who recited and knew the Vedas perfectly and understood the science of mantra. Having an intimation of the truth of dukkha, suffering, he formulated the intention to seek nirvana by developing detachment. Sumedha reasons from the existence and impermanence of samsara that there must be a way leading to the transcendence of samsara, and he resolves to experience it. Quote, there must be that way. It is impossible for it not to be. I shall seek that way for the utter release from becoming. Unquote. Thus, having formulated the intention, Sumedha created the seed of realization that, in accordance with the law of karma, must culminate in enlightenment, for nothing can pass from the law of karma except through its fruition. Of course, the historical existence of Sumedha, here I have 1.6 quadrillion years ago. Not sure what that's based on. My calculation now would be... let me just check that. Did I say 1 age ago or a number of ages ago? That may be the reason. I don't say in the talk. Okay, well, let's assume it's a number of kalpas. So 1.6 quadrillion years ago is not the point of the story. Did I say a number of ages? Okay, then that's why the difference. Sumedha abandoned his wealth and went to the mountain called Dhammaka in the Himalayas. Initially built, incidentally, 1.6 quadrillion years is longer than the age of the universe, which is 14 billion years. So clearly we're talking about an alternate universe. Sumedha abandoned his wealth and went to the mountain called Dhammaka in the Himalayas, initially building a leaf hut for himself. After a while, he makes bark clothing and dwells under a tree, living on fallen fruits. This description clearly associates the Buddha with the Yakshi tree spirit cult of ancient India, often associated with goddesses and other female deities. This association reappears when the Buddha abandons asceticism because a local girl, believing him to be a tree god who has benefited her, offers him a dish of rice gruel. Hearing that a Buddha had arisen in the world, Sumedha travels with the throngs to where Dipankara is in order to generate merit for himself, chanting Buddha, Buddha. Incidentally, in my sim, in this visit atoll called Zhangzhung, I actually had someone appear in the sim who went to one of the Buddha images on the sim and was chanting Buddha, Buddha. When he encounters Dipankara, he falls down before him and lays his matted hair in the mud of the path, so that Dipankara is able to proceed without soiling his feet. Sumedha then mentally formulates his earnest wish to become a Buddha, in the first formal formulation of the Bodhisattva vow in the canonical Pali literature. Quoting, "While I was lying in the earth, it was thus in my mind. If I so wished, I could burn up my defilements today. What is the use, while I remain unknown, of realizing Dhamma here? Having reached omniscience, I will cause the world, together with the Devas, to cross over. By this act of merit of mine towards the supreme among men, I will reach omniscience. I will cause many people to cross over. Cutting through the stream of samsara, shattering the three becomings, embarking in the ship of Dhamma, I will cause the world with its devas to cross over." Unquote. Sumedha's reference to being able to burn up his defilements, besides being a clear reference to the doctrine that karma potentials can be destroyed, alludes to the Buddhist view of merit based on acts of propitious karma. In the Buddhist view, the merit of moral acts accrues to the doer based on three principles: the quality of the intention, the quality of the action, and the quality of the object of the action. Thus, a good act directed towards an evil object, say an act of benevolence directed towards a thief, generates less merit, propitious karmic potential, than a good act directed towards a good object, for example, a gift to a great man or woman. So Tseten realized then and there that the combination of the personal merit that he has acquired due to his practice to this point, combined with the extraordinary merit of an actual Buddha, would be sufficient to destroy all his defilements and propel him into Buddhahood itself. Nonetheless, even with this exceptional opportunity, it took Tseten, here we are, 100,004 ages to realize his intention. So we're talking about a period of time of 100,004 times, assuming it's a great kalpa, 1,343,840,000. And if you work that out, you'll probably come up with the figure of 1.6 quadrillion, which I mentioned. Again, I gave this talk a while ago, so I don't recall the specific calculation that I did at the time. Dipankara, seeing him, declares, quote, "Do you see this very severe ascetic, a matted hair ascetic? Innumerable eons from now, he will be a Buddha in the world. He will be named Gautama." Unquote. The translator, I.B. Horner, adds, quote, "His aspiration for Buddhahood was made, therefore, with the welfare of the world in view, beside which his own realization of Dhamma and his own crossing over faded into insignificance. Both had been accomplished without any instruction from a teacher." Unquote. Not quite 2 quadrillion years later, Tseten's act of merit culminates in the enlightenment of Gautama under the Buddha Bodhi tree. The self-realization of the Bodhisattva and the self-realization of an Arhat are definitely distinct, according to canonical sources, from the very first expression of the Buddha speech, the Buddha Vachana, and remains a pervasive theme in all of the canonical sources right up until the Parinirvana, as Bhikkhu Bodhi acknowledges in his paper, Arhants, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas, written in published at least in 2010. Yet there is no less doubt that the Buddha taught the short path of the Arhat to his immediate disciples, whereby an individual may, through the hearing of Dharma, cut off all attachment to rebirth by interrupting the closed circuit of paticca samuppada, which means arising in dependence upon conditions. Despite a variety of rather tortured translations, we have 2 existing English words that capture the actual sense perfectly: co-production and co-determination. Generally, however, it's translated dependent origination. The essential meaning is that causes and effects are inextricably interconnected. The Buddha compared it to a hairball of incredibly intricately interconnected fibers, and told Ananda it is his most perplexing idea, which leads to the realization of emptiness or shunyata itself. He then applied this insight to the appearances of birth, old age, suffering, and death, and showed the linkage of the causes and conditions as they develop out of ignorance, karmic potentialities, innate intelligence, mind matter, the 6 sensory fields, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming. The Buddha then realized that the karmic arrow of time has 2 directions, forward and reverse, and that all karmic constructs are inherently unstable and impermanent, and therefore liable to be converted into their opposite. The Pali texts divide the pratitya samutpada into different numbers of links, or nidanas, 12 being the most common, but the division into 10 links highlights the 2 points in the sequence that have special significance, being the beginning-end point and the midpoint, respectively. If we look at this linkage or chain, one can see that the will has little effect on karmic potentials, innate intelligence, mind, matter, the senses, feeling, contact, becoming, birth, aging, and death, These are all objective processes that occur automatically or are unconscious, as we say. You can't really get at any of them. However, between feeling contact and grasping is desirous attachment, the primary attachment being the ego, atta or self, which reflects, as it were, the deep nescience of the unconscious, the primary not knowing, that is the radical ontological ignorance that is at the root of karma and reality itself. Each of these is accessible to the mind, the one through the cultivation of dispassion, also referred to as detachment, non-attachment, disinterest, non-grasping, etc., and the other, the deeper, more primary root of desire itself, through the cultivation of wisdom, knowledge, knowing, which also appears as the first principle of the path. The path of detachment is the path of the Arhat. The path of the Buddha, which is the path of the Bodhisattva, is the path of wisdom. Sometime after the passing on or parinirvana of the Buddha, the issues of the wisdom of Arhants became a sticking point in the Sangha when a figure by the name of Mahadeva set forth his 5 points on the fallibility and imperfection of Arhants. The majority accepted the view that the wisdom of the Arhants was imperfect, causing the split in the Sangha that ultimately led to the division of the Hinayana and the Mahayana. The followers of the first took the pursuit of the goal of the Arhat, as taught by the Buddha, to be the only legitimate approach. The followers of the Mahayana, on the other hand, took the pursuit of the goal of the Bodhisattva, as followed by the Buddha himself, to be the higher path. The only Hinayana sect to survive today is the Theravada, and actually, I should point out, I've done a little more research into the early Buddhist sects now. In fact, I'm compiling a list of them, of which I have so far identified 50. And it was even before the Mahayana that the question of the fallibility or infallibility, the wisdom or ignorance of Arhants became an issue. There are Hinayana sects no longer, which have not survived. Only the Theravada sect survived to the present time, but there were Hinayana sects that also felt that the Arhants were imperfect, and eventually developed into the Mahayana, but were in fact Hinayana. So this schism, if you like, this question about the status of Arhants, actually arose within the Hinayana. Also, I should point out, since I'm discussing this, that today we have a view that the Hinayana and the Mahayana are separate from each other and reject each other. This is actually an oversimplification and is false on two fronts. First, historically, even when the Mahayana arose, Hinayana and Mahayana monks or monastics would live in the same viharas, in the same monasteries, would live together, go to the same lectures, and were not separated at all. They did read separate texts. The Mahayana followers read the Mahayana Sutras, obviously, which the Hinayana followers did not. But the separation that we think of today between them did not exist at the beginning, and it was only over time that the Hinayana and the Mahayana began to really separate from each other. And even today, Theravada, some Theravada monastics actually do study with Mahayana teachers, and I would also point out, I've lost my train of thought. What was my other point going to be about Mahayana and Hinayana? Yes, in the vow of a Bodhisattva, which of course is a Mahayana vow, it is a downfall to disparage the Hinayana. So while it might be true today that Hinayana monastics reject the Mahayana, it is not true that the Mahayana rejects the Hinayana. Although some scholars doubt the historicity of Mahadeva, who may simply be a literary device, and for our purposes it doesn't really matter, the 5 points of Mahadeva clearly exist. They address a question that must have been on the minds of some since the first Buddhist council of Mahakassapa. The mind of the Bodhisattva, or the path rather, the path of the Bodhisattva, described in the Pali tradition, is essentially identical with the Mahayana conception. There's some difference, but I'm not going to go into that. The root idea is the same. The path of the Bodhisattva begins with the resolution to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, and proceeds through 6 perfections: giving, morality, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. This is not so different from the Noble Path, which consists of higher virtue, which equals giving, morality, and patience, higher wisdom, which equals wisdom, and higher mind, which equals energy or meditation. So they're really mirror images of each other to a great extent. Different goal, but the path is comparable. The Buddha actually says that the practice of these 3 things subsumes the entire Vinaya. And I have a quotation from Hajime Nakamura, one of my favorite scholars, a Japanese. Quote, "No detailed regulations had yet been formulated at the time of the Buddha's death. What we call the Patimokkha, a set of more than 200 rules governing monastic life, was in the earliest period a very simple formulation," unquote. And I've actually gone into that in my blog at polysiddhas.com, in which I discuss the relationship between the Vinaya and the Mahayana, or the Bodhisattva precepts. Sorry, let me just find out where I was. There is no suggestion in the Pali texts that Gautama was the last in the series. There is no Buddhist seal of the prophets, to quote an Islamic idea. Such an idea is incomprehensible in the light of Buddhist ontology. The Pali texts, therefore, refer to the next Buddha, Metteyya, or Maitreya. There will be an indefinite number of Buddhas in the future, as there were in the past. Therefore, there must be a path leading to Buddhahood, and there must be those following this path, the Bodhisattvas. Therefore, one cannot say that the path of arhatship is the only valid or efficacious path. It appears that the Buddha taught the path of the arhat because in this age of degeneration, the path of the Bodhisattva is too hard. This is hinted at immediately following Gautama's enlightenment. However, there is no escaping karma. Therefore, the Bodhisattva seed is karmically efficacious whenever or wherever it is planted, provided it is watered by the power of truth. The Mahayana path of the Bodhisattva differs from the Pali description in one particular, however, and actually this is what I was thinking of before. The Mahayana vow of a Bodhisattva states that the Bodhisattva vows to postpone enlightenment until all other beings are enlightened and samsara itself is rooted out. However, elsewhere I have argued that this view is essentially anti-ontological and impossible. In the Pali account, Sumedha vows to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings and does so, thus passing out of samsaric existence. So in fact, as a Bodhisattva, the historical Buddha did not postpone his enlightenment indefinitely. He did, in fact, become a Buddha and pass out of enlightenment before all beings were saved, obviously. Since we're not saved, we're still here. Therefore, this is a difference between the conception of the Bodhisattva in the Pali Canon and the mainstream religious concept of the Bodhisattva in many Mahayana texts. He neither destroys nor redeems the world, but the Dharma bubble continues to expand until its energy, the power of truth, is exhausted, and ignorance and suffering again reign together alone. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. That completes my talk. Does anyone have any questions or discussion they would like to have before we proceed with the dedication of merit? And while you're thinking about that, I'll just make a short announcement, which may be of interest to some people. Those of you who are familiar with Ajahn Brahm, perhaps, or his student Bhikkhu Sujato, I guess it is, Sujato, who's both of whom, well, Ajahn Brahm is very well known, and Bhikkhu Sujato is also quite well known. In any case, Bhikkhu Sujato has a website called Sutta Central, which some of you may be aware of, and they have decided to pick up all of my talks on the Digha Nikaya, and that I've been giving at the Buddha Center, and perhaps others as well. So my talks are now available on the Sutta Central website for those of you who may be interested in the Sutta Central website. And I've also been corresponding with him as well. So, I don't see any questions, comments, or discussion. So let's proceed with the dedication of merit. Whoops. There we go. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. I will be returning to the Chitta Bhavana Ashram next Tuesday at 4 o'clock rather. I have to get my time straight. 4 o'clock Second Life time. And I also teach at the Buddha Center. We'll be wrapping up our Digha Nikaya series over the next 2 weeks on Sundays at 2 o'clock p.m. Second Life time. So, thank you very much. Namaskar.